Today, we're talking about prophets and prophecy and how it works in the Bible and how it should work in our contemporary society. But to do so, I want to go back thousands of years. When I was growing up, I was a big fan of Greek mythology, Zeus, Hercules, Apollo, Artemis. And one of my favorite stories was about the Trojan War, a 10-year war between the kingdom of Troy, protected by a huge wall, and the Greeks, who were led by King Agamemnon of the Greek city of Mycenae, whose brother's wife Helen had been kidnapped by a Trojan prince named Paris. Now, in this story, the Greeks finally defeated the Trojans by fooling them into thinking that they had given up after 10 years of war, and they seemed to disappear. And they left behind a huge wooden horse that the Trojans considered a trophy of victory. The horse you're looking at is in front of the Jade Dynasty restaurant at Ala Moana Center. It was the biggest statue of a horse I know about on Oahu. I would guess it's about 10 feet tall, but it is much, much smaller than the one left to the Trojans. As I said, all of the Trojans thought this was a great victory gift, this Trojan horse. Well, all except one person, Princess Cassandra. She was a beautiful, highly desirable woman who had caught the attention of the god Apollo. And as a gift, Apollo gave Cassandra the power to foresee the future. Tragically, though, when Cassandra rejected Apollo's romantic advances, he was furious, and he cursed her by allowing her to keep the gift of predicting the future, but no one would believe her. So when the Trojan horse was wheeled into the city, over Cassandra's hysterical pleas not to let the horse inside the walls, the Trojans did it anyway and celebrated victory over the Greeks. And later that evening, after the Trojans were exhausted from celebrating, Greek soldiers, hundreds of them, who had been hiding inside that giant horse, so now you have an idea of how big it must have been, they got out and destroyed the city. And the kingdom of Troy was defeated, and though no one believed her, Cassandra's prediction was correct. By the way, in computing, the term Trojan horse refers to a seemingly harmless email attachment or something like that, often disguised as a prize, which then gets past the firewall of your computer and infects it, steals information, and sometimes wrecks your computer. The name comes from this myth. Well, the spirit of Cassandra the prophetess lives on, and I'm going to call it the Cassandra syndrome. In the Bible, the prophets were a group of special people called by God to speak God's word and tell God's truth. The role of the prophet was to look at the truth of the society and tell people that if they continued in certain behaviors, bad things would happen in the future. In the passage that Mark read, the prophet Micah observed and told the truth about the rulers, priests, and false prophets, whose evil, corrupt behavior would result in disaster for the Israelite nation. So the accurate prediction of the future was not by some magical powers, but by accurately evaluating the truth of the conditions and behavior of the people, which would result in a negative future. In our modern times, there are still truth tellers who are like prophets. They analyze what's going on and correctly predict the future based on the truth of those observations. For example, a woman named Laurie Garrett, who was a journalist with degrees in bacteriology and immunology, wrote a book in 1994, 26 years ago, predicting that if we did not take timely action, we would have a deadly pandemic. She came to this conclusion by researching this topic extensively, analyzing data, interviewing scientists, and the like. But like Cassandra of Troy, Laurie Garrett told the truth and it was the same result. She correctly foresaw a global pandemic, but for the most part, it's as if we didn't believe it. Only it wasn't a curse put on a Greek god, but it was because people did not believe the prophetic prediction because they were indifferent, in denial, or didn't pay attention. I have to admit, I heard about coronavirus maybe in December, but I shrugged. I didn't really take it seriously in January, not really in February, and didn't pay attention until March. And by that time, the damage was done. I had no idea it would reach the level it has. I'm sure I'm not the only one. There are people who denied that the coronavirus was real, and some still deny it. But with over 5 million cases worldwide and 1.6 million in the US alone, with almost 100,000 deaths in America and 1/3 deaths worldwide, it's very real. The Cassandra syndrome continues. Truth tellers are giving their truthful perspective, and many people don't believe it, or maybe don't want to believe it. In part 2, we'll talk about how this affected the prophets.